The radio crackled with static before the tower operator's voice cut through, sharp and confused. Unknown aircraft, you are not cleared for approach. Repeat, you are not cleared. Identify yourself. The sun hung low over Kandahar airfield, painting the Hindu Kush mountains in shades of amber and blood. Ground crews paused mid-task, shielding their eyes against the glare, watching a dark shape limp across the horizon. It moved wrong. Too slow, too low, trailing a ribbon of black smoke that unfurled like a funeral banner against the dying light. The tower operator keyed his mic again, tension creeping into his professional monotone. Aircraft on final approach, you are trailing heavy smoke from your port wing. State your intentions. Still nothing. Just the hiss of dead air and the distant thunder of a wounded turbofan engine screaming its mechanical agony across the desert. Colonel Marcus Hendricks stood in the operations center, arms crossed, jaw tight. He'd been in Afghanistan for 11 months, and he'd seen pilots do incredible things. But this was different. The radar signature was unmistakable. An A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Air Force's flying tank, beloved by ground troops and dismissed by fighter jocks as a relic from a forgotten war. Except this relic was currently defying every aerodynamic principle Hendricks had learned at the academy. "Get me eyes on that aircraft," he ordered. A camera operator swung the tower's high-resolution optics toward the approaching Warthog, and the image resolved on the main screen. The left engine was completely destroyed, its housing torn open like a gutted fish, spewing smoke and fragments of turbine blade. The left wing showed obvious battle damage, peppered with holes large enough to see daylight through. Hydraulic fluid streamed from ruptured lines, leaving a misty trail in the aircraft's wake. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. Hendricks leaned forward, studying the impossible geometry of that crippled machine still maintaining controlled flight. The A-10 was designed to take punishment, sure, but this exceeded any damage parameters he'd ever studied. "Who's flying that thing?" he demanded. A young intelligence officer, Captain DeMarco, pulled up the flight roster on his tablet, fingers moving quickly. His face went pale. "Sir, according to the logs, that's Striker 2-3, Captain Cale Voss." Hendricks frowned. The name meant nothing to him. "And," DeMarco swallowed hard, "Sir, Captain Voss has been in the air for 6 hours. She was supporting a special operations team in the Korangal Valley. They called in a troops in contact emergency at 0900. She," Hendricks repeated, something unreadable crossing his features. The tower operator's voice rose an octave. "Striker 2-3, if you can hear us, rock your wings." On the screen, the damaged A-10 dipped its right wing fractionally, then leveled. The left wing barely moved, likely locked in place by damaged control surfaces. Hendricks grabbed a headset. "Striker 2-3, this is Kandahar Tower Actual. We have emergency crews standing by. Can you confirm your status?" For a long moment, nothing. Then a voice emerged from the static, female, controlled, each word carefully measured as if speaking required immense concentration. "Tower, Striker 2-3. Single engine, hydraulics at maybe 15%. I've got no flaps, no air brake. Gear is gravity dropped and I'm not sure it's locked. Fuel is. Well, fuel is academic at this point." Her voice was steady, professional, but Hendricks could hear the exhaustion beneath it, the kind that came from hours of flying a mortally wounded aircraft through hostile airspace. "Copy that, Striker 2-3. Can you make the runway?" A pause. When Cale Voss spoke again, there was something else in her voice. Not fear exactly, something harder to define. "Tower, I'm going to try, but you should probably evacuate the approach path. This is going to be ugly." Hendricks watched the A-10 descend, its nose pitched up at an awkward angle compensating for the asymmetric thrust. The right engine howled, pushed beyond its design limits, while the left side trailed that ominous black smoke. Around him, the operations center had gone silent, every eye fixed on the screen. "All personnel clear the runway," Hendricks ordered into his radio. "Medical and fire crews stand by at the threshold. Everyone else, minimum safe distance." He paused, then keyed the mic back to Voss. "Striker 2-3, what's your ejection seat status?" Another pause, longer this time. "Seats damaged, Tower. Shrapnel took out the firing mechanism during the second gun run. I'm writing this one down regardless." Someone behind Hendricks muttered a curse. The colonel's jaw tightened. Flying a damaged aircraft was one thing. Flying a damaged aircraft with no possibility of ejection was something else entirely. That wasn't bravery. That was a suicide run with extra steps. "Understood, 2-3," he said quietly. "We've got you, bring her home." They crossed the airfield boundary at barely 100 knots. Nose high, right wing dipped to counter the dead engine's drag. Cale Voss had approximately 30 seconds to get this right. 30 seconds to judge the descent rate, compensate for the missing hydraulics, gauge the crosswind that buffeted her damaged wing, and somehow convince 8 tons of titanium bathtub and bullet-scarred metal to kiss the runway instead of cartwheeling across it in a ball of fire. The altitude bled away. 500 feet. 400. The airport fire trucks raced along the parallel taxiway, keeping pace with the descending aircraft. Foam sprayers stood ready. Ambulances idled, their lights painting the tarmac in urgent reds and whites. 300 feet. Hendricks realized he was holding his breath. Beside him, Captain DeMarco had his phone out, recording. For the accident investigation, presumably. Or maybe just because he understood he was witnessing something that would be talked about for years. 200 feet. The A-10's landing gear hung below the fuselage, 3 wheels down, but Hendricks could see even from the tower camera that the left main gear looked canted wrong, probably bent by the battle damage that had chewed through the wing. "Come on," someone whispered. 100 feet. Voss keyed her mic one last time. "Tower, if this goes bad, make sure somebody feeds my dog. Her name's Juniper. She likes the expensive kibble." Hendricks blinked. Of all the things he'd expected to hear from a pilot seconds from a potentially fatal landing, concern for a pet hadn't been on the list. "Copy that, Striker 2-3, he replied, his voice rough. "But you're going to feed her yourself." 50 feet. The A-10's nose lifted slightly as Voss flared, bleeding off the last of her airspeed. The right main gear touched first, raising a puff of rubber smoke. Then the left gear hit, held for a fraction of a second, and collapsed. The left wing dropped, grinding into the concrete with a sound like the world ending. Sparks erupted in a cascade of orange and white. The aircraft slewed violently left, still carrying forward momentum, dragging its ruined wing across the runway. Metal shrieked against concrete. The working engine shut down, silencing its desperate howl. For a moment the A-10 seemed like it would tumble, roll, tear itself apart in the catastrophic cartwheel Hendricks had been dreading. Then the nose gear caught traction. The friction of the destroyed wing bit harder. The Warthog ground to a halt at a 45-degree angle across the runway, its tail section still intact, cockpit canopy unbroken. Silence fell across Kandahar airfield. Hendricks stared at the screen, not quite believing what he'd just witnessed. Fire trucks converged on the aircraft, foam already spraying. Medical personnel sprinted toward the cockpit. Through the camera's zoom, he watched the canopy hinge open. A figure in a flight suit and helmet climbed out onto the wing root, moving stiffly but under her own power. Captain Cale Voss stood on the wing of her ruined aircraft for a moment, surveying the damage as if seeing it for the first time. Then she sat down heavily, pulled off her helmet, and let her head drop into her hands. "Get me a vehicle," Hendricks said quietly. "I'm going down there." Captain DeMarco looked at him. "Sir, shouldn't we let medical? Get me a vehicle, Captain." The colonel's voice allowed no argument. By the time Hendricks reached the runway, they'd gotten Voss down from the wing and were guiding her toward an ambulance. She waved off a medic trying to put a blanket around her shoulders, insisting she could walk. Up close she looked younger than her service record suggested. Late 20s, maybe 30. Dark hair plastered to her scalp with sweat, gray eyes that seemed to look through rather than at things. Blood seeped through a tear in her flight suit near her left shoulder, but she moved as if she hadn't noticed. "Captain Voss," Hendricks called. She turned, came to a somewhat shaky attention. "Sir." "At ease. You need medical attention." "It's superficial, sir." "Caught some shrapnel during the engagement, but nothing serious." Her voice still carried that careful control, each word measured. Hendricks studied her. "You just flew a dead aircraft across 200 miles of hostile territory and landed it with one engine and no hydraulics." Voss's expression didn't change. "Yes, sir. The alternative was leaving a special forces team without close air support. That didn't seem acceptable. It was the matter-of-fact delivery that struck Hendricks. Not bravado, not false modesty, just a simple statement of the situation as she'd assessed it. The team you were supporting, he said. Did they make it out? For the first time, something flickered in those gray eyes. Relief, maybe. Yes, sir. All 12 extracted safely. No friendly casualties. And how many enemy did you engage? I'm not sure, sir. I made 7 gun runs and expended all my Mavericks. Forward air controller estimated at least 40 enemy KIA, possibly more. They'd set up an ambush on the exfil route. Company strength element, well-armed, good tactical position. 7 gun runs. Hendricks did the math in his head. That meant Voss had deliberately flown her damaged aircraft into enemy fire 7 separate times rather than breaking off and seeking emergency recovery. When did you take the engine damage? 3rd run, sir. Something big. Probably a ZU-23, maybe an RPG with a lucky shot. Lost the left engine immediately. Assessed I still had sufficient capability to continue the mission. Sufficient capability. She'd had 1 engine, failing hydraulics and enemy fire chewing her aircraft to pieces, and she decided she had sufficient capability. Hendricks became aware that a crowd had gathered. Ground crews, maintenance personnel, other pilots, all watching the blood-streaked woman who just cheated death through a combination of skill and sheer stubborn refusal to accept the alternative. Captain, he said carefully, are you aware that your ejection seat was non-functional? Voss met his gaze steadily. I became aware during the 4th run, sir, when I tried to assess bailout options and discovered the mechanism was damaged. And you continued the mission. It wasn't a question. The team was still in contact, sir. They needed me. The simple words hung in the desert air. Behind Voss, the ruined A-10 smoldered under blankets of fire suppression foam, a testament to everything she wasn't saying. Hendricks had commanded air operations for most of his career. He'd written commendation reports for pilots who'd done extraordinary things. But standing on the Kandahar runway in the fatting light, looking at this exhausted captain who spoke about flying through hell like she was describing a routine training sortie, he found himself momentarily at a loss for words. Sir, Voss prompted, are you relieving me of flight status? The question caught him off guard. What? I violated several protocols, sir. Continued engagement after sustaining critical damage, failed to declare an emergency until the tactical situation was resolved, brought a destroyed aircraft back to a major airfield rather than diverting to a safer emergency strip. She recited the list without emotion, as if reading from a checklist. By regulation, those are grounds for investigation and possible grounding. Hendricks stared at her. She was genuinely worried he might ground her for saving 12 men and bringing back an aircraft that by all rights should have been scattered across a valley in pieces. Captain Voss, he said slowly, I'm not grounding you. I'm probably going to have to put you in for a medal. Something shifted in her expression, not quite disbelief but close. That's not necessary, sir. I'll be the judge of what's necessary. Right now you're going to medical and you're not going to argue. That's an order. She nodded. Allowed the medics to guide her toward the ambulance. Hendricks watched her go, then turned to examine the aircraft. The maintenance chief, a grizzled master sergeant named Kowalski, stood beside the wreckage, shaking his head. Sir, I've been working on A-10s for 22 years, Kowalski said. I have never seen one take this much damage and still fly. This isn't just 1 or 2 lucky breaks. This is. I don't even know what this is. Hendricks approached the aircraft, studying the battle damage. Bullet holes peppered the fuselage. The left engine looked like it had been fed through a shredder. The wings showed evidence of at least 3 separate impacts, probably heavy-caliber rounds or shrapnel. Hydraulic lines dangled like severed arteries. The aircraft's titanium bathtub, the armored shell that protected the cockpit, had been hit multiple times. Deep gouges scarred the metal, but it had held. Inside the cockpit, Hendricks could see blood on the seat, more spatters on the instrument panel. How did she keep this in the air? Kowalski asked, his voice carrying genuine awe. Hendricks didn't have an answer. He'd seen the footage. He'd watched that landing. He still didn't quite believe it had happened. Pull the gun camera footage, he ordered. And the aircraft data recorder. I want to see exactly what she was dealing with. Yes, sir. Kowalski hesitated. Sir, you should know, the troops she was supporting, they've been on the radio, asking about her. Seems she kept them alive for almost 4 hours before the extraction birds could get in. 4 hours. Hendricks revised his assessment of the situation. This hadn't been a quick engagement gone wrong. This had been an extended battle, Voss circling above while enemy forces tried to overrun a trapped Special Forces team, making gun run after gun run with an aircraft that was dying around her. Who was the forward air controller? He asked. Staff Sergeant named Cruz, sir. He's with the team that just got extracted. They're at the field hospital now getting checked out. I want to talk to him. The sun had fully set by the time Hendricks made it to the field hospital, a collection of climate-controlled tents and prefab buildings at the south end of the base. He found Staff Sergeant Marcus Cruz in a recovery ward, his left arm in a sling, fresh bandages wrapped around his ribs. The rest of his team occupied nearby beds, various states of injury but all alive. Cruz tried to stand when Hendricks entered. The colonel waved him back down. At ease, Sergeant. I'm here about your air support today. Cruz's face transformed. Sir, is Captain Voss okay? We heard she took heavy damage. They wouldn't tell us anything. She landed 20 minutes ago. She's fine. The aircraft is scrapped, but she walked away. Relief washed over Cruz's features, so profound it was almost physical. Thank God, sir, you need to understand without her we'd all be dead, all of us, no question. Hendricks pulled up a chair. Tell me what happened. Cruz gathered his thoughts, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured ribs. We were doing a reconnaissance patrol in the Coringal, supposed to be a quiet sector, minimal enemy presence. Intel was wrong. They were waiting for us. Hit us maybe 2 clicks from the planned extraction point. Company strength force, well-armed, well-positioned. They'd set up a perfect ambush. He paused, the memory clearly painful. We had 12 men. They had at least 60, probably more. They had us pinned in a dried riverbed, no cover, taking fire from 3 sides. I called for immediate close air support, expecting maybe a fast mover would drop some bombs and buy us time to move. Instead, we got Voss. What was your first impression? Drix asked. Cruz's laugh was bitter, honest. When I heard a hog was inbound, I was relieved. A-10s are perfect for close support. Then when the pilot checked in and I heard it was a woman, he trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. You can speak freely, Sergeant. Sir, I'm not proud of this, but my first thought was that we were screwed. I'd heard the talk. Female pilots, diversity initiatives, standards getting lowered. I thought we were getting somebody who wouldn't be able to handle it. Hendricks said nothing, just waited. I was wrong, sir. I was so goddamn wrong I don't have words for it. Cruz's voice grew thick with emotion. She came in low, I mean danger close low, 50 meters from our position. I could see the brass casings from her gun ejecting. She tore through their position on the first run, bought us maybe 10 minutes to consolidate and find better cover. Then they started shooting back at her. Cruz described the battle with the precision of a professional soldier who'd seen things he'd never forget. How Voss had made run after run, each one precisely coordinated, each one walking her cannon fire within meters of friendly positions. How the enemy had brought up heavier weapons, filling the air with tracer fire and RPG trails. How Voss had adjusted her tactics, coming in from different angles, using the terrain to mask her approaches, never giving them an easy shot. On the third run, I saw smoke coming from her left side, Cruz continued. She broke off and I thought that was it. She'd taken a hit and was RTB, but she circled back, got on the radio and said, Viper 1-6, I've got some technical difficulties, but I'm still mission capable. Continue marking targets. Like she just lost a radio, not a whole engine. Hendricks made notes on his tablet, but he was watching Cruz's face as much as listening to his words. How long did she stay on station? From first contact until the extraction birds showed up. 3 hours and 47 minutes, sir. I know because I was watching my watch, counting down, praying we could hold out. Every time I thought she had to be running on fumes and would have to leave, she'd come back around for another run. She told me later she'd been flying on one engine for almost 3 hours. 3 hours on one engine with a crippled aircraft, circling over enemy territory. Hendricks tried to imagine the focus that required, the physical strength needed to muscle a damaged aircraft through the sky for that long. Did you know her ejection seat was damaged? Not until afterward, sir. She never mentioned it, never mentioned anything. She was calm on the radio the whole time, professional. The only time I heard any emotion was when my medic got hit. She asked if he was okay. When I told her he'd survive, she said, "Good. Mark the guns that fired those shots. Priority target." Then she put 100 rounds exactly where I marked. Silenced that position completely. One of Cruz's teammates, a younger soldier with bandages covering most of his face, spoke up from a nearby bed. "Sir, can I say something?" Hendricks nodded. "That pilot saved my life specifically. I was hit, couldn't move, and the enemy was advancing on our position. She came in so low I could have thrown a rock and hit her. She hovered that thing, and I don't even know how that's possible in a warthog, but she put her gun exactly between me and the enemy. If my team timed to pull me back. If she'd been off by 5 meters either way, she'd have killed me or let the enemy overrun us, but she was perfect." "She didn't hover," Cruz corrected gently, "but it felt like it. She was moving maybe 20 knots, firing the whole time, so precise you'd think she was on a range. And this was after she'd lost her engine, after her hydraulics were failing, after she'd been in the air for hours." Hendricks looked around the ward at the 12 soldiers who'd made it home. Some with minor injuries, some serious, but all alive. All because one pilot had decided that regulations and safety margins and self-preservation were secondary to the mission. "Is there anything else you think I should know, Sergeant?" Cruz met his eyes. "Sir, I've worked with a lot of pilots. Fast movers, hogs, helicopters. Some good, some great, some not so much. Captain Voss is different. It's not just skill, though she's got that in spades. It's commitment. When she said she'd keep us alive, I believed her, and she did. Whatever medal you're planning to give her, it's not enough." Hendricks stood. "Thank you, Sergeant. Focus on healing, all of you." As he left the hospital, he found Captain DeMarco waiting outside with a tablet. "Sir, you wanted the aircraft data. We pulled it. And, sir, you need to see this yourself." They returned to the operations center. DeMarco queued up the data recorder files, cross-referenced with the gun camera footage. What Hendricks saw over the next hour would stay with him for the rest of his career. The footage began with Voss's initial approach, the ground below a maze of brown hills and green valleys. The radio chatter was routine at first. Then Cruz's voice urgent. "Any available CAS, this is Viper 1-6, troops in contact, immediate assistance required." Voss's response was instantaneous. "Viper 1-6, Striker 2-3, 2 miles out. Send your position and target description." The aircraft banked hard, and suddenly the battle came into view. Even on the grainy gun camera, Hendricks could see muzzle flashes, troops pinned down, enemy forces maneuvering for position. Voss's first run was textbook. She rolled in at a shallow angle, the GAU-8 Avenger cannon spooling up with its distinctive roar. 30mm rounds tore across the hillside, and enemy positions simply ceased to exist. The camera shook with the recoil, but the Pipper stayed steady on target. Good hits, Cruz's voice on the radio. "Viper 1-6, you just bought us some breathing room. Copy, repositioning for run 2. The second run came from a different angle, perpendicular to the first, catching enemy forces as they tried to regroup. More cannon fire, more devastating accuracy. Then the third run, and this was where everything changed. Voss rolled in, lined up her shot, fired a burst. Then the aircraft lurched violently. The left engine fire light illuminated on the instrument panel. The master caution alarm blared. The gun camera swung wildly as Voss fought for control, the aircraft yawing hard left as the dead engine created massive asymmetric thrust. On the audio, her breathing was audible, quick and sharp, but her voice remained steady. "Viper 1-6, Striker 2-3, I've taken a hit. Stand by." The footage showed her running through emergency procedures, shutting down the damaged engine, adjusting trim to compensate. The right engine's power indicator climbed to maximum continuous, pushed beyond normal limits. Hydraulic pressure gauges showed rapid loss of fluid, and through it all, she kept flying. "Striker 2-3, Viper 1-6, understand your hit. Can you make it to base?" Viper 1-6 assessing now. A pause. On the data display, Hendricks could see her checking fuel, engine status, control, surface response. The aircraft was dying around her in slow motion, each system degrading, each minute bringing new failures. Viper 1-6, Striker 2-3. I'm mission capable for continued support. Where do you need me? Hendricks heard DeMarco inhale sharply beside him. She knew, the captain said quietly. She knew right then how bad it was, and she stayed anyway. The footage continued. Run 4, Run 5, each one more difficult than the last as the aircraft became harder to control. The gun camera showed Voss compensating in real time, adjusting her approach angles, her dive angles, her recovery techniques. What should have been simple had become extraordinarily complex, and she made it look routine. On Run 6, the data recorder showed her discovering the ejection seat damage. The firing mechanism indicator went from green to red. No malfunction warning, just a quiet system failure that meant the difference between life and death. Voss keyed her mic. Viper 1-6, be advised my emergency egress capability is compromised, not affecting current mission. That was it. No drama, no panic. Just a clinical statement of fact before she rolled in for another gun run. Jesus, DeMarco whispered. Hendricks said nothing, transfixed by what he was watching. This wasn't recklessness. This was calculated risk, assessed and accepted, each decision made with full knowledge of the consequences. Voss knew she was flying a dying aircraft with no way out, and she'd made the conscious choice to continue because 12 men needed her. The final runs were the most harrowing. The aircraft barely responding, controls sluggish, the right engine temperature climbing into the red. But Voss's aim never wavered. Each burst landed exactly where crews marked. Each run bought the ground team more time. Finally, Cruz's voice. Striker 2-3, Viper 1-6, extraction birds inbound, 5 minutes. You are cleared off station. And thank you, you saved us. Copy, Viper 1-6, good luck. Voss turned for home. The gun camera showed her climbing to altitude, then the long, agonizing transit back to Kandahar. Every minute was visible in the data. The fuel gauge dropping toward empty. The hydraulic pressure continuing to fall. The right engine temperature climbing higher, approaching critical limits. She ran calculations on the knee board strapped to her thigh, checking and rechecking her fuel consumption, her glide range, her options if the remaining engine failed. And through it all, that same measured breathing, that same controlled calm. When Kandahar finally appeared on the horizon, the relief should have been palpable. But the data recorder showed Voss's heart rate actually increasing. Because now came the hardest part, getting this broken aircraft onto the ground without killing herself or anyone else. The landing approach was visible from multiple angles. The tower camera, the gun camera, the aircraft data recorder painting a technical picture of aerodynamic forces pushed to their absolute limits. Hendricks watched Voss coax the A-10 through the approach, each correction precise, each adjustment calculated. She had one chance. No hydraulics meant no go-around, no waved-off landing. Whatever happened on this approach was final. The touchdown, the collapsed gear, the grinding slide across the runway. The data recorder showed the G-forces spiking, the airframe stress reaching levels that should have torn the aircraft apart. But the titanium bathtub held, the structure held, and Voss walked away. The footage ended with her climbing out of the cockpit, the data recorder still running, showing her elevated heart rate slowly returning to normal as she sat on the wing. Hendricks turned off the display, sat in silence for a long moment. "Sir," DeMarco prompted. "Get me her personnel file," Hendricks said quietly. "I want to know who she is." The file arrived within minutes. Hendricks read it in his office, the base settling into night around him. Captain Cale Voss, 29 years old, commissioned through ROTC at a state university nobody had heard of. Middle-class background, no military family connections, no fast track to success. Just a woman who'd wanted to fly and had worked her way through every obstacle to do it. Her training records were good but not exceptional. Above average scores, no failures, no particular distinctions. The kind of officer who did well enough to progress but never stood out enough to attract attention. Her assignment history showed a pattern. She'd requested A-10 specifically, one of the few pilots who actually wanted the unglamorous close air support role. While her peers competed for fighter assignments with their prestige and career advancement potential, Voss had asked for the warthog. Why? Hendricks muttered to himself, studying the file. The answer came in her personal statement from flight school, a section most officers treated as a formality but Voss had taken seriously. "I don't want to fly because I love aircraft," she'd written. "I want to fly because I believe in supporting the people on the ground. The infantry, the special operators, the men and women who close with and destroy the enemy face to face. They deserve air support they can count on. That's what I want to provide." Simple words, unfashionable sentiment in an air force that increasingly prioritized technology over direct support, but honest. Her fitness reports were consistently strong, competent, reliable, solid tactical judgment. But reading between the lines, Hendricks saw the subtle biases. "Performs well despite her gender," one evaluator had written, as if being female was a handicap to overcome. "Could benefit from more aggressive flying," another suggested, mistaking careful precision for timidity. None of them had seen what Hendricks had just watched. None of them had understood that Voss's careful, methodical approach wasn't caution, but rather the mark of someone who took her responsibilities seriously. Her call sign appeared in the file. "Quiet." Hendricks frowned. Call signs usually came from memorable moments, mistakes, or personality traits. He found the explanation in a note from her first operational squadron. "Named Quiet because she doesn't engage in typical pilot bravado or social posturing, keeps to herself. Some concern about team integration." Reading that, Hendricks felt something cold settle in his chest. The squadron had been concerned about her because she didn't engage in ego-driven nonsense, because she focused on the mission instead of politics, because she was different. His intercom buzzed. "Sir, Captain Voss is out of medical. They cleared her, minor injuries only. She's asking to file her mission report. Send her in." Voss arrived 10 minutes later, still in her blood-stained flight suit, moving with visible stiffness. She'd refused to change, insisted on handling the paperwork first. She stood at attention in front of his desk. "At ease, Captain. Sit down before you fall down." She sat carefully. Up close, Hendricks could see the exhaustion in her face, the way her hands trembled slightly despite her controlled demeanor. "Medical cleared you?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Shrapnel wound was superficial, some bruising from the landing, nothing that requires grounding." "The landing where you crashed a multi-million-dollar aircraft?" Voss's expression didn't change. "Yes, sir. I accept full responsibility for the loss of the aircraft. I made every effort to preserve it, but given the damage sustained and the mission requirements, total loss was unavoidable." She was taking responsibility for destroying an aircraft that had been shot to pieces, keeping her alive. Hendricks studied her, trying to reconcile the exhausted woman in front of him with the warrior he'd watched on the gun camera footage. "Captain, tell me about your call sign." She blinked, clearly not expecting that question. "Sir, Quiet. Why do they call you Quiet?" A brief hesitation, then, "Because I don't talk much, sir, in social situations. I focus on the mission and some people interpret that as being aloof." "And are you aloof?" "No, sir. I'm just not interested in proving myself through conversation. I prefer to let my work speak for itself." Hendricks leaned back in his chair. "Your work just spoke pretty loudly, Captain." For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty, maybe. Or perhaps just confusion about where this conversation was going. "Sir, if you're going to discipline me for protocol violations, I understand. I made choices in the air that probably fall outside acceptable parameters, but I'd make the same choices again. Those men needed support and I was the only asset available. Leaving them wasn't an option I was willing to consider." "You're not being disciplined, Captain. I'm trying to understand you." Voss looked genuinely puzzled. "Not complicated, sir. I'm a pilot. I do my job, that's all." "That's all," Hendricks repeated slowly. "You flew a critically damaged aircraft for 3 hours over hostile territory with no ejection capability, brought it back across 200 miles of desert and landed it on one engine with no hydraulics. And you describe that as doing your job." "Yes, sir. What else would you call it?" What else indeed? Hendricks pulled up her personnel file on his screen, turned it so she could see. "Do you know what your fitness reports say about you?" "I've read them, sir." They call you competent, reliable, solid. Do you know what they don't call you? No, sir. Exceptional, outstanding, the kind of officer who should be fast-tracked for command. He watched her face carefully. Does that bother you? Voss was quiet for a moment. Then, permission to speak freely, sir. Granted. I don't care about fitness reports or career advancement. I care about bringing troops home alive. If doing that well means I don't get promoted as fast, that's fine. I didn't join the Air Force to make general. I joined to fly missions like today. The simple honesty of it struck Hendricks harder than any amount of bravado could have. She meant it. Voss genuinely didn't care about the politics or the career games. She cared about the mission. The troops you supported today, he said. Staff Sergeant Cruz and his team, I spoke with them. Are they okay, sir? The quick concern in her voice, the way she leaned forward despite her obvious pain. They're fine, thanks to you. Cruz said you're the best pilot he's ever worked with. He's exaggerating, sir. I just did what needed doing. He also said that when he first heard a female pilot was inbound, he was worried. Voss's expression went carefully neutral. I'm used to that reaction, sir. How often do you deal with that? People doubting you because of your gender. Every day, sir, to varying degrees. The matter-of-fact delivery was somehow worse than if she'd been angry. This was just her reality, so commonplace she'd stopped reacting to it. Hendricks felt that cold feeling in his chest deepen. How do you handle it? I prove them wrong, then I prove them wrong again. Eventually, some of them start to see past the bias. The ones who don't, I avoid when possible and tolerate when necessary. It's not ideal, but it's workable. And it doesn't make you angry. Now Voss smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Sir, I've been angry about it since flight school, but anger doesn't fly aircraft or support troops. Competence does. So I channel it into being so good at my job that the bias becomes irrelevant. Hendricks thought about all the evaluations that had damned her with faint praise, all the subtle suggestions that she wasn't quite measuring up to some unspoken standard. And he thought about that gun camera footage, the precision, the commitment, the sheer skill on display. Captain, I'm putting you in for the Distinguished Flying Cross. Probably some other medals too. And I'm writing a fitness report that says what should have been said years ago. Voss looked uncomfortable. Sir, that's really not necessary. I was just doing your job. Yes, I know, but part of my job is recognizing excellence when I see it and making sure that recognition is properly documented. He paused. The Air Force needs more pilots like you, Captain Voss, not fewer, and I'm going to make sure people understand that. She seemed unsure how to respond. Finally settled on, thank you, sir. Dismissed. Get some rest. We'll debrief formally tomorrow. Voss stood, saluted, and left. Hendricks watched her go, then turned back to his computer and began writing. Not the sanitized, bureaucratic language of typical fitness reports, but a clear, direct assessment of what he'd witnessed. An officer who embodied everything the service claimed to value but often failed to recognize. By morning, the story had spread across the base. Ground crews who'd seen the landing told anyone who'd listen. The Special Forces team shared their account in the Chow Hall. Pilots gathered to watch the gun camera footage, falling silent as they realized what Voss had accomplished. And slowly, gradually, the attitude began to shift. The mockery, the subtle dismissiveness, the casual bias that had followed Voss through her career started to crack, because now there was evidence. Now there was proof. Now there was a story that couldn't be dismissed or minimized. Hendricks heard it in the conversations around the base. Did you see what Quiet did? She flew that thing on one engine for 3 hours. The SF guys say she saved all of them. Her ejection seat was broken. She knew she couldn't bail out. The story grew with each telling, but the essential facts remained unchanged. And those facts were undeniable. 3 days later, Hendricks convened the formal debrief in the operations center. Voss sat at the conference table, still moving carefully, her left arm in a sling now that the adrenaline had worn off and the injuries had properly manifested. Across from her sat the maintenance team who'd analyzed the wreckage, the intelligence officers who'd assessed the enemy engagement, and representatives from the Special Forces unit she'd supported. Master Sergeant Kowalski presented first, using a laser pointer to indicate damage points on a detailed schematic of Voss's aircraft. The left engine sustained catastrophic damage from what we believe was a 23 mm round from a Zu-23 anti-aircraft gun, he began. The projectile entered here, severed the primary fuel line, and caused a turbine blade failure that fragmented the entire compressor section. Loss of engine power would have been immediate and total. He clicked to the next image. The hydraulic system took multiple hits. We found 7 separate punctures in the main lines, 3 in the backup system. By the time Captain Voss landed, she was operating on residual pressure that should have been exhausted 45 minutes into the flight. How she maintained any control authority is frankly beyond my understanding of the system's capabilities. Another image, the collapsed landing gear. The left main gear took what appears to be shrapnel damage that bent the main strut 3 degrees off axis. This made it impossible to lock in the down position. The gear held long enough for initial touchdown, which honestly surprises me. The structural stress should have caused immediate failure. Kowalski lowered his pointer. Sirs, ma'am, I've been maintaining A-10 since they first rolled off the production line. I've seen these aircraft take incredible amounts of damage and keep flying. That's what they're designed to do. But this, he gestured at the schematic, this exceeds every damage scenario I've studied or experienced. The fact that Captain Voss kept this aircraft airborne, maintained controlled flight, executed tactical maneuvers, and successfully landed is something that shouldn't have been possible. But the evidence is irrefutable. She did it. The intelligence officer went next, displaying aerial photos of the engagement area. Based on recovered enemy equipment and post-battle assessment, we estimate Captain Voss engaged a force of approximately 75 enemy fighters. The enemy force included at least 3 heavy machine gun emplacements, 2 Zu-23 anti-aircraft positions, and multiple RPG teams. They'd prepared the ambush site extensively, with overlapping fields of fire and good defensive positions. He zoomed in on one section of the terrain. Captain Voss's gun runs were extraordinarily precise. We found enemy casualties clustered in areas within 25 meters of friendly positions. Friendly forces reported no close air support injuries, despite the danger-close nature of multiple engagements. This level of precision under these circumstances with a damaged aircraft represents exceptional tactical skill. The Special Forces representative, a major named Kincaid who'd flown in specifically for the debrief, spoke last. "My men are alive because of Captain Voss. That's not hyperbole. We were trapped, outnumbered, taking casualties with no viable escape route. Our mission had gone from reconnaissance to survival in a matter of minutes." He looked directly at Voss. "Captain, I've been in combat for 15 years. I've worked with every type of air support available. What you did was the finest example of close air support I've ever witnessed. Your precision, your persistence, your willingness to continue the mission despite catastrophic damage to your aircraft, all of it combined to save 12 men who would otherwise be dead. My team and I are eternally grateful." Voss shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Sir, I appreciate the sentiment, but I was just—" "If you say doing your job one more time, Captain, I'm going to argue with you," Hendricks interrupted. "What you did exceeded any reasonable definition of duty. Let's be clear about that." He turned to address the room. "This debrief is being documented for several purposes. First, to extract tactical lessons learned. Second, to support the medal recommendations I'm submitting. Third, and perhaps most importantly, to ensure that Captain Voss's actions are properly understood and recognized within the Air Force." Hendricks pulled up the gun camera footage on the main screen. The room had seen it already, but watching it again in an official setting carried different weight. The silence as Voss's third run ended with the engine hit was profound. "Pause there," Hendricks ordered. The screen froze on an image of the damaged aircraft, smoke trailing, muzzle flashes visible below. At this moment, Captain Voss made a decision. She assessed her aircraft damage, her tactical situation, and her mission requirements. She could have broken off, declared an emergency, and headed for the nearest recovery airfield. No one would have questioned that decision. Instead, she chose to continue the mission. He let that sink in. Now, some might characterize that choice as reckless, foolhardy, an unnecessary risk. I want to address that directly. Captain Voss, walk us through your decision-making process at this point in the engagement. Voss sat up straighter, falling into the analytical mindset of a professional debrief. Sir, when I lost the left engine, my immediate priority was maintaining controlled flight. I assessed that with one engine and degraded hydraulics, I still had sufficient capability to maneuver and employ weapons. The enemy force was actively engaging friendly positions, and our ground team had no other immediate support available. The nearest alternative CAS asset was 30 minutes out. In 30 minutes, the tactical situation would likely have deteriorated beyond recovery. She paused, collecting her thoughts. I considered the risks: continued flight with battle damage, possibility of additional systems failures, limited emergency egress capability. I weighed those against the certainty that without continued air support, friendly forces would likely suffer casualties or be overrun. The calculation seemed clear. The risk to one pilot was acceptable compared to the risk to 12 ground personnel. When did you discover your ejection seat was non-functional? Kincaid asked. Approximately 20 minutes after the engine loss, sir. I was running through my emergency procedures checklist and noticed the firing mechanism indicator had gone red. And that didn't change your assessment? No, sir. It removed one of my risk mitigation options, but it didn't change the fundamental tactical situation. The ground team still needed support. I was still capable of providing it. Knowing I couldn't eject just meant I needed to be more careful about avoiding additional damage. The way she said it, so calmly, as if flying a crippled aircraft without an ejection seat through hostile airspace, was merely an inconvenience requiring slightly adjusted procedures. Major Kincaid shook his head in apparent disbelief. Captain, you understand that most pilots faced with that situation would have disengaged immediately. That would have been the safe, regulatory-compliant choice. No one would have blamed you. I understand that, sir, but blame wasn't my concern. Keeping your men alive was. The room fell silent again. Hendricks watched the faces around the table, saw the moment when Voss's words truly registered. This wasn't bravado or machismo. This was genuine commitment to the mission, expressed by someone who'd calculated the risks and accepted them without hesitation. Let's continue the footage, Hendricks said. They watched the remaining gun runs, each one a testament to skill and determination. The intelligence officer provided running commentary, identifying each target engagement, noting the precision, the tactical adjustments, the clear evidence of a pilot completely in control despite the circumstances. When the footage reached the landing sequence, Kowalski leaned forward, studying every detail. Captain, what was your plan if the right main gear had collapsed along with the left? Voss considered the question. I had no plan for that contingency, Sergeant. If both main gear failed, the aircraft would have nosedived into the runway at speed. With no ejection capability, the outcome would have been catastrophic. I assessed the probability of bilateral gear failure as low, given that the right side hadn't taken direct fire. It was a calculated risk. But you knew it was possible, Hendricks said. Yes, sir. But the alternative was attempting an off-field landing in the desert, which carried even higher risk given the aircraft's control issues. She'd thought it through, every contingency, every possibility, and she'd chosen the option that gave her the best chance of survival while still completing the mission. The debrief continued for another hour, dissecting every aspect of the engagement. Tactics, weapons employment, communication protocols, maintenance issues, all of it documented in excruciating detail. When it finally concluded, Hendricks dismissed everyone except Voss. Captain, there's something else we need to discuss. She waited patient. Your fitness reports have been inadequate, Hendricks said bluntly. Reading through your file, it's clear that you've been consistently undervalued by your chain of command. I'm correcting that, but I wanted you to understand why it matters. Sir, let me finish. The Air Force has a problem. We talk about wanting diverse perspectives, about recruiting and retaining talented officers regardless of gender. But then we allow subtle biases to undermine those goals. Your evaluations are a perfect example. Competent, reliable. These are not words we use for officers destined for command. They're words we use for officers we want to keep in the same role indefinitely. Voss's expression was carefully neutral, but Hendricks saw the tension in her shoulders. "You've been dealing with this your entire career," he continued. "Flying better than your peers, working harder, proving yourself repeatedly, and still being treated as somehow less than. And you've internalized it to the point where you don't even expect recognition for extraordinary performance. Sir, I don't need recognition. I need to fly missions." "You need both, Captain, because recognition translates to assignments, to opportunities, to the chance to train other pilots and shape the culture. If officers like you never advance beyond flight captain, never get to positions where you can influence how we train and evaluate pilots, then the bias perpetuates." Hendricks leaned forward. "I'm not asking you to become political or to compromise your focus on the mission. I'm telling you that your example matters. What you did 3 days ago is going to be studied, analyzed, and discussed. Your tactics will be incorporated into training. Your decisions will be evaluated in classrooms. And every time someone discusses this engagement, they're going to have to confront the fact that the pilot who pulled it off was a woman many people doubted." Voss was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than usual. "Sir, do you want to know the real reason I don't talk much in social situations? Why I keep to myself? If you're willing to share. Because I'm tired, sir. I'm tired of being tested constantly. Tired of having to prove I belong every single day. Tired of knowing that any mistake I make reflects on every woman who will fly after me, while my male counterparts can screw up and it's just one individual's failure." She met his eyes. "So I stay quiet. I focus on being so good that there's no room for doubt. And I try not to think too hard about the fact that I have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Because if I think about it too much, the anger gets in the way and I can't afford that. The mission can't afford that." The honesty of it, the exhaustion beneath her controlled exterior, struck Hendricks profoundly. He'd commanded for years without fully understanding what officers like Voss dealt with daily. "I'm sorry," he said. "For whatever it's worth, I'm sorry that's been your experience. I'm going to do everything in my power to change it, at least within my area of responsibility." "I appreciate that, sir." Hendricks pulled out a folder, slid it across the desk. "This is my fitness report on you. Read it. If you think I've characterized anything unfairly, tell me, but I want you to see what proper recognition looks like." Voss opened the folder, began reading. Hendricks watched her eyes move across the page, saw the moment when she realized what he'd written. "Sir, this is extraordinarily positive. It's accurate, Captain, that's all it is." Kept reading. The report detailed her tactical acumen, her technical skill, her commitment to the mission, her performance under pressure. It recommended her for weapons officer training, for instructor duty, for command track progression. It used words like exceptional, outstanding, the kind of officer who should be leading combat squadrons. "Sir, if you submit this, it's going to raise questions. My previous reports don't match this assessment. Let them raise questions. I'll answer them. I'll suggest that perhaps your previous evaluators missed something important." Voss closed the folder carefully. "Thank you, sir. This means more than you probably realize. You earned it. Now any questions before you're dismissed?" "Just one, sir. When can I return to flight status?" Hendricks had been expecting this. "Medical says another week minimum, and I'm assigning you 2 weeks leave after that. Non-negotiable. You need time to process what happened, both physically and psychologically." "Sir, I don't need." "Captain, you flew a dying aircraft for hours, knowing you couldn't eject, keeping men alive through pure skill and determination. Then you crashed. Then you walked away and tried to immediately file paperwork. You're taking leave, that's an order." Voss looked like she wanted to argue, but finally nodded. "Yes, sir." "Good, dismissed." After she left, Hendricks sat in his office, thinking about the conversation. About the exhaustion in her voice when she talked about proving herself constantly. About the casual acceptance of bias as just another operational challenge to overcome. He pulled up the Air Force's diversity metrics, the glossy reports about recruitment and retention. The numbers looked good on paper, but numbers didn't capture the lived experience of officers like Voss, who excelled despite the system rather than because of it. His phone rang. The wing commander, Colonel Sarah Matthews, calling from her office at Bagram. "Marcus, I just read your preliminary report on that A-10 incident. Tell me you're not exaggerating. Every word is accurate, ma'am. I've got the footage if you want to see it. Send it, and send me Captain Voss's complete personnel file. If she's half as good as your report suggests, I want her in my wing. With respect, ma'am, she's better than the report suggests. The report is constrained by what I can prove with documentation. What I witness goes beyond that. A pause. Marcus, you're not one for hyperbole. What am I missing? Hendricks chose his words carefully. Ma'am, I've been flying for 23 years. I've commanded operational squadrons. I've evaluated hundreds of pilots. Captain Voss is operating at a level I rarely see. But more than that, she has something most pilots lack: absolute clarity about what matters. She doesn't fly for glory or career advancement. She flies to keep ground troops alive, and that purity of purpose makes her extraordinarily effective. Then, why haven't I heard of her before? Because she's been consistently undervalued by her chain of command. Her fitness reports read like she's barely competent, when the reality is she's one of the best close air support pilots in theater. Gender bias. Matthews's voice was flat. Almost certainly, though it's subtle enough to hide behind objective assessments. But the bias ends now, ma'am. I'm making sure of it. Good. Send me everything. If she's as good as you say, I want her instructing, not just flying line missions. We need her training other pilots. Brief her when she returns from leave, ma'am. After the call ended, Hendricks began assembling the materials. The footage, the damage assessment, the witness statements from Cruz and his team, all of it painting a picture of exemplary performance. He was about to hit send when his phone rang again, this time an unfamiliar number. Colonel Hendricks. Sir, this is Captain Brad Morrison, 74th Fighter Squadron. I'm calling about Captain Voss. Hendricks's voice cooled. Go ahead, Captain. Sir, I've heard the stories about what happened. I wanted you to know that I flew with Voss in training, and I owe her an apology. Explain. Morrison's voice carried genuine shame. Sir, I was one of the guys who gave her a hard time. Nothing overt, just the usual crap. Doubting her abilities, making jokes, suggesting she got her slot through diversity quotas. I thought I was just being realistic, maintaining standards, but I watched the footage, sir. What she did, I couldn't have done. Most of our squadron couldn't have done it. And I realize now that I was wrong, not just about her, but about my whole attitude. Hendricks let the silence stretch out. Let Morrison feel uncomfortable. Captain, what exactly do you want from this conversation? Permission to apologize to her directly, sir, and to go on record saying I was wrong. If that helps counter any of the bias she's faced, I want to be part of that. It was something, at least. Captain Voss is on leave. When she returns, you can speak with her if she's willing. But Morrison understands something. Your apology is a start, but it doesn't undo the damage. Every joke, every doubt, every casual dismissal adds up. It creates an environment where talented officers have to work twice as hard for half the recognition. If you're serious about change, don't just apologize. Change how you treat and talk about all the female officers you work with. Yes, sir. Understood. After Morrison hung up, Hendricks sat back, processing. One captain calling to apologize. How many others were having similar realizations? How many were doubling down on their biases? The phone kept ringing throughout the day. Other officers who'd heard the story. Some supportive, some skeptical, some clearly uncomfortable with the attention being paid to a female pilot's achievement. Hendricks handled each call patiently, providing facts, sharing footage, letting the evidence speak for itself. By evening, he was exhausted, but he'd accomplished something. The story was spreading beyond Kandahar, carried by every person who'd seen the footage or heard the details. And with each telling, the legend of Quiet Voss grew. A week passed. Voss spent it in her quarters, reading, sleeping, carefully not thinking about the engagement that everyone else was discussing. Her shoulder healed. The bruises faded. The physical injuries were easy. The rest was harder. She kept replaying decisions in her mind. Could she have positioned better on run 3, avoided the hit that killed her engine? Should she have broken off sooner, called for alternative support? The endless cycle of second-guessing that every combat pilot experienced. On day 8, she went to visit her aircraft, or what remained of it. The wreckage had been moved to a maintenance hangar where technicians were documenting every detail for the accident investigation. Voss stood in front of the broken A-10, studying the damage in person for the first time. It looked worse than the photos suggested. The left wing was shredded, the engine completely destroyed. The fuselage was pockmarked with bullet holes. How had this thing flown? How had she kept it in the air? Master Sergeant Kowalski approached from behind. "Captain, didn't expect to see you here." "I wanted to see it," Voss said quietly. "Understand the damage from a maintenance perspective. It's extensive. We're still cataloging, but current count is over 200 separate impact points. Any one of a dozen hits could have been fatal. The fact that you survived, let alone completed the mission, is remarkable." Voss reached out, touched the scarred titanium bathtub that had protected her. She held together, did what she was designed to do. The aircraft performed, yes, but Captain, the aircraft didn't fly itself. The aircraft didn't make 7-gun runs with one engine. The aircraft didn't land when every system was failing. You did that. She was quiet for a moment. "Sergeant, can I ask you something?" "Of course, ma'am." "Do you think I made the right call, staying in the fight after I lost the engine?" Kowalski considered the question seriously. "Ma'am, I'm maintenance, not a pilot, but I've supported combat operations for 2 decades. I've seen pilots make heroic decisions and foolish ones. Sometimes they're the same decision viewed from different angles." He gestured at the wreckage. "You assessed your capabilities accurately. You maintained control throughout. You accomplished the mission and survived. Those facts suggest you made the right call, but I'll tell you what bothers me." "What's that?" "The fact that you're here second-guessing yourself while every pilot I've talked to is in awe of what you pulled off. You shouldn't be questioning your decisions, ma'am. You should be proud of them." Voss smiled slightly. "Pride seems premature. I crashed a $40 million aircraft. You flew it until it couldn't fly anymore, accomplished the mission, and walked away. In my book, that's not a crash. That's a controlled landing under impossible circumstances." They stood together, looking at the broken machine. "Will she fly again?" Voss asked. Kowalski shook his head. "No, ma'am, the damage is too extensive. She's done. But she went out doing exactly what she was built for, protecting the people on the ground and bringing her pilot home. There are worse ends for an aircraft." Voss nodded slowly. "Can I have a piece, something small, as a reminder?" "I think that can be arranged, ma'am." Kowalski pulled out a multi-tool, approached the aircraft, and carefully removed one of the squadron patches that had been affixed to the fuselage near the cockpit. It was scorched, torn at the edges, but intact. He handed it to Voss. She held it carefully, this small piece of the aircraft that had kept her alive. "Thank you, Sergeant." "Any time, ma'am and Captain. For what it's worth, I hope they assign you a new bird soon. The ground troops need pilots like you up there." After leaving the hangar, Voss walked the flight line, watching aircraft take off and land. The familiar sounds and smells of jet fuel and hot metal. This was home in a way few places had ever been. Growing up, she'd never quite fit anywhere. Too focused for the popular kids, too driven for the casual students, too serious for the social crowds. She'd found purpose in flying, found a place where skills mattered more than social navigation. Except that wasn't entirely true, was it? Skills helped, but the social dynamics still mattered, still shaped how she was perceived and evaluated, still created barriers she had to overcome. A voice called her name. She turned to see Staff Sergeant Cruz approaching, his arms still in a sling but moving better than when she'd last seen him. "Captain Voss, I was hoping I'd run into you." "Sergeant Cruz, how's the recovery going?" "Good, ma'am. Doctors say another week and I'll be back to full duty." He paused, seeming uncertain. "Ma'am, I need to say something. I need to apologize." "For what?" "For doubting you. When I heard a female pilot was inbound to support us, my first reaction was worry. I'm ashamed of that. I let bias color my judgment." Voss had heard this speech before in various forms. The pattern was familiar. "Sergeant, you don't need to apologize. You didn't know me. You had no basis to assess my capabilities." "With respect, ma'am, that's exactly the problem. I should have trusted that any pilot assigned to support us was qualified. Instead, I made assumptions based on gender. That was wrong, and I wanted you to know that I've been talking to my team about it, making sure they understand why those assumptions are harmful." This was different from the usual apology. Cruz wasn't just expressing personal regret. He was taking responsibility for changing attitudes within his unit. "I appreciate that, Sergeant, truly." "Ma'am, my team wants to meet you. properly, not just in passing. They want to thank you for keeping them alive. Would you be willing to join us for dinner? Nothing formal, just food and conversation. Voss's instinct was to decline. Social situations were draining, especially when she was the center of attention. But Cruz's expression was genuine, and these were the men she'd kept alive. They deserved more than a polite refusal. "I'd be honored, Sergeant." They arranged the details. That evening, Voss found herself in a corner of the dining facility with Cruz and his 11 teammates. They'd pushed tables together, claimed a section away from the main crowd. The men were a mix of ages and backgrounds, united by their profession and the bond forged in combat. They were careful